So, it's almost the end of Lent, and I must confess that I have a resurrection problem. Thankfully, I don't have to preach on Easter Sunday this year, so you'll be in the thoroughly capable, theologically confident hands of our senior minister, Donna Scopper, and you need not worry that I will ruin the sacred, uplifting fun at that year's sacred shared meal. But it's only fair that you know now that you have an associate minister with a resurrection dysfunction. I can trace the origins of my problem back to small Sunday school rooms in Northeast Ohio, rooms where Bible stories and hymn lyrics were accepted without question, where resurrection, and especially that big Easter resurrection with capital E and capital R, was simply part of our tradition's connecting fabric, and therefore part of our community's sustaining fabric. We young ones took communion without question. We got confirmed without question. We read and sang without question. In fact, looking back, it amazes me that as a middle schooler, I basically questioned everything else in my life, but not that I had a personal soundtrack running in the back of my brain. But I asked questions of everything else. Why school? Why rules? And then the natural one that came after that, why detention? But never why resurrection? But when folks accept things without question, they're usually in for a rude awakening of earth-shaking doubt somewhere down the line, and I was a prime candidate. I don't totally know the exact moment when my problem started to bloom, but it haunts me to this day. Through my years running from church, through my years at seminary, and now through the preparation both for this service and for the upcoming 9th memorial service in which I will have participated in as many months. 9 memorials in 9 months for 9 people that I knew in some way, many of whom you knew. I have to admit I've been pretty pessimistic these past few months, and that's really upset my hope to consistently self-identify as the resident Pollyanna in these parts. A creeping malaise has left behind a bit of a glittered shell that barely covers up the gathering coal dust on the inside. And for the first time, I didn't even know if I could write a sermon for this Sunday. The past few months had just finally caught up with me. They'd finally dipped me into the bone-dry valley, and I read that line in our ancient testimony, "Mortal, can these bones live?" And I said to myself, outcome unclear. And then, at least 2 amazing, dare I say, resurrecting things happened this past week. The first occurred during a trip to our Museum of Modern Art, where I was touring a live dance exhibition by Belgian choreographer Anna-Theresa de Kiersmacher. Now, at the last minute, I had thought to cancel my visit, but I pulled myself together, and I got there. And I was trying hard to focus, but was still getting distracted by my own fears, my own disappointments, my own scattered plans for how to talk about resurrection today with a congregation both smarting with grief and way too smart for simple answers. That's you. As I stood there in my pessimistic pool, 2 boys, probably no more than 13, appeared beside me, settling in to watch the dance and vibrating with that unique combination of fear and bravado so common to our own Judson Sonic Youth Group, breathing heavily as if they'd just played a quick pickup basketball game on their way up the stairs. And as they stood there, mouth breathing, one said to the other, "Yo, this is where the magic happens." I caught my own jaw dropping. I'd been standing there for 20 minutes and hadn't realized I'd been standing where the magic happens. It took the simple breath of another, younger, excited voice to inject new spirit into my zombified state. And this mouth breather didn't even know me. He wasn't trying to do anything to me. His exclamatory breath wasn't designed to make me deny the reality of my own grief, my own fear, my own worry. He probably even had griefs, fears, and worries of his own, but he was noticing the magic. And his breath of awe was simply left there for me to draw in to myself, to remind me that I was standing where the magic happens if I cared to notice. So, look at how many times the word breath appears in today's prophecy from Ezekiel. If you're a Sunday school graduate, you probably know this one. But have you ever noted the artful repetitions here? This is poetry. The Hebrew word ruah appears 9 magical times here, translated into breath, winds, that's ruah plural, and spirit. Each of these 9 ruahs invites the breathless, flesh-covered, bony zombies to suck in that thing that will give them new life, that thing that seems almost like magic, that thing that will resurrect them if the zombies will only notice and breathe the ruah in. Ezekiel wrote this poetic resurrection story in the 6th century BCE. That's a long time ago, a time when his own home had been brutally suffocated, a pessimistic, collapsed age when relying on simple images of resurrection seemed naive. Does that remind you of any current events? Ezekiel's tale falls somewhere between horror story and inspirational biopic. The horror story comes in the half-alive, flesh-covered zombies, but the inspiration only comes with the final ingredient: mortal. Can these bones live? If they hope to, breath is needed. Wind is needed. Spirit is needed. And in the words of that teenaged MoMA prophet, holding the space for magic is needed. So the second thing that interrupted my Lenten malaise this week happened in my very own office, straight from the mouth of a college student. She wanted to interview progressive religious folks who nurture creativity, and I thought some good old-fashioned talk about the spiritual dimension of art could pull me out of my pessimistic pit, so I welcomed her. She had attended last Sunday's service just to get a taste of what we're all about, and at the end of our interview, she said, "Oh, one more thing. That open mic thing toward the end of the service, where people talked about their sadnesses and their happiness." And I said, "Celebrations and concerns?" And she said, "Yes. Can I be frank?" And I said, "Yes," bracing myself for some innocently snarky critique. And she said, "That's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Where else can you get that? It's such a breath of fresh air that you make so much space and take so much time to hold one another's stories like that." And I felt another jolt of breath enter my dry bones, another jolt of spirit resurrecting my weary flesh. And suddenly, everything else started to fall into place. I felt the unique history and the scrappy magic and the continuing resurrection that emanates through this building and through this gathering of living, breathing people in a way that feels both brand new and very, very ancient. In the light of this outsider acknowledgement of the magical space we hold here together on Sundays, every element of today's service started to suddenly look like a little resurrection in itself. The songs Whitney sings are not only from decades ago and given new life when she wails them here for us, but her show this month is also a reimagining of the Macbeth story, something that was written over 4 centuries ago. The song that will finish our service, which sets words spoken by James Baldwin over 5 decades ago to new music for us to sing and breathe in today, takes on newly resurrecting possibilities. And how can we possibly forget the delightful cacophony of Sky Mackley's mega organ? We heard it more than we even thought we would today. The mega organ cheekily takes a few air mattresses, a crap ton of harmonicas, and some simple breath, and resurrects the sounds and traditions of an organ long out of use, giving its gorgeous, decorative shell newly aerated sonic life. Suddenly, a service about resurrection that had left me stressed and weary became an authentic potpourri of the past and the present meeting in a sacred space, where stories collide and swirl with new breath, spiriting us toward the future. And so now, everywhere I turn, I'm going to get annoying. Everywhere I turn, I'm seeing resurrection in the face of grief. As I read George Saunders' novel Lincoln in the Bardo, which has kept me company these past couple of weeks, I realize that Saunders, through his prose, is doing what all of this morning's artists are doing, and really what each of us does whenever we gather to share our celebrations and concerns. Saunders' novel springs from a common myth. Maybe some of you know it. In 1862, after President Abraham Lincoln's young son Willie died, Lincoln is rumored to have entered the graveyard on several occasions to take Willie's body out of his coffin and cradle his dead child's flesh and bones, a private, solitary act of mourning. We think it's just a myth, but it was actually repeated in newspapers. So we don't know if any of these visits actually happened, but George Saunders imagines that they did. And he's taken this seed of a story and imagined that Lincoln actually wasn't alone in those moments, but that he was actually surrounded by the souls of the graveyard, a congregation of colorful personalities caught in the liminal space between life and death. And in Buddhism, that space is called the Bardo. But Saunders' version of it is uniquely his own. In Saunders' imagining, this community surrounds Lincoln without his knowing it, and as he cradles his own dead son, they recount their own stories, their own sadnesses and joys, their own lives and loves. The entire book is an airing of celebrations and concerns. Today's modern testimony is just one of the novel's descriptions of the specific and universal pleasures that each individual soul holds within them. It's a reminder of how any place where we hold one another's griefs and fears and joys in community brings breath into our bodies and becomes the place where magic happens. Now, magic might be a strange word to use in church, but its root definition simply means to influence the course of events through mysterious forces. We make space to do that mysterious thing here at Judson, especially during celebrations and concerns, because our congregation, like all groups of people, is a valley of dry bones, a graveyard of yearning souls seeking to find the breath that will resurrect us in this in-between place, in our own bardo, the space between our time here on earth and what comes after. We are flesh and blood and skeletal systems who bring our weary multitude to this room, seeking something that we can't get on our own in the cold graves of solitude. We seek the space for resuscitating communal, circular breath. And this isn't some cheap, liberal Christian trick for me to get around the question of resurrection. With the recent literal continuing deaths in our congregation, and with the recent figurative deaths of so much that we hold dear in our country, I've still got resurrection dysfunction, I promise you. Things are still a mess. But today, I've moved our celebrations and concerns segment to the end of our service because I want it to be the messy, resurrecting moment that we take out with us into the messy world. The last messy thing that we do together today. And even if just for today, I want it to be the intended climax of this service. Whatever is shared out loud in that moment and whatever is silently breathed into that moment, for that moment, this space is the unique resurrection we have to offer a world in need of magical spaces. The liturgy, the songs, this sermon, the art, all of that in today's service is the flesh and skeleton. But when we get to the segment for celebrations and concerns, that is the breath. Without it, these flesh-covered bones cannot survive. And we can't be pessimists. We must survive. So now, while we prepare our elements for our communion moment, let's inhale and exhale and share more than just food. Because, if you will just notice it, this is where the magic happens. So we'll gather you back up in a few minutes. Make sure everybody has something to eat and get to know anybody you don't know. Go for it.